There's something haunting about the Arctic, a place so vast, so empty. It almost feels alive. Beneath its endless white, it hides the memories of those who dared to cross it and never came back. In 1845, two British ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, set sail from England. Their mission? To find the last missing piece of the Northwest Passage, a frozen route that could connect Europe to Asia through the top of the world. It was supposed to be the greatest geographical discovery of the century. Instead, it became one of the most chilling mysteries in human history. The man leading this expedition was Sir John Franklin, a decorated explorer, 60 years old, a man chasing one last triumph before his time ran out. Behind him, 128 officers and sailors, two state-of-the-art ships, and enough supplies to survive for 3 full years in the ice. On paper, it was perfection. In reality, it was a countdown to silence. When the Erebus and Terror left the port of Greenhithe, crowds lined the riverbanks, cheering, waving flags, completely unaware they were watching a funeral procession disguised as a voyage. No one would ever see those men alive again. For a while, everything seemed normal. The ships were last spotted by a whaling vessel in Baffin Bay, and then nothing, no signals, no letters, no survivors, just whispers carried by the wind and the ice. Years later, rescuers would search the Arctic for Franklin's men, finding scraps of metal, torn journals, and bones scattered across the tundra. But the real story, what truly happened out there, was buried under layers of snow, secrets, and madness. This isn't just a story about explorers, it's about obsession, about how far humans will go for glory, and how nature humbles every ambition. So before we dive into the white abyss, do one thing, subscribe and stay with me till the end. Because once you enter this story, you'll never look at snow the same way again. The morning of May 19, 1845, the docks of Greenhithe were alive with celebration. Flags fluttered, bands played, families waved goodbye, unaware they were watching their loved ones sail into legend and oblivion. The two ships, Erebus and Terror, stood gleaming in the early light, black hulls reflecting on calm water. Each was reinforced with iron plating, a masterpiece of naval engineering, designed to crush through Arctic ice where others had failed. Inside, the crew celebrated their destiny. They were not just sailors, they were pioneers. They believed history would carve their names into the map of the world. But behind the pride, there was arrogance. The British Empire believed nothing could stop it, not even nature itself. They saw the Arctic as just another obstacle to conquer, a puzzle that would bend to human will. They were wrong. As the ships sailed northward, the wind grew colder, the sky darker, and the water turned to glass. By the time they reached Baffin Bay, the ice began to close in, beautiful, silent, merciless. Men who had never known fear started to whisper at night. They heard cracking sounds under the hull, as if the ocean itself was alive. Groaning in hunger, but orders were orders. They pushed forward. Franklin's logbook records optimism. But the last entry, written in neat, steady handwriting, feels like the calm before an unseen storm. Slight wind builds up in the background. Soon, the Arctic would trap them like insects in amber. 3 years of supplies would become meaningless in a world where time itself froze, and the ice does not forgive. When the final message from the Erebus and Terror vanished, London waited. Weeks turned into months, months into years. The empire that thought it ruled the world realized something terrifying. The world does not care who you are. In the Arctic, kings and sailors die the same way, quietly, forgotten, beneath the snow. Winter came faster than expected. By September 1846, the Erebus and Terror were locked in a sea of ice, frozen solid, unable to move, trapped like bones in a frozen grave. The Arctic sun vanished below the horizon, and with it, all sense of time. For months, the men lived in endless night, a world of blue shadows and silence. Only the groaning ice reminded them they were still alive. Inside the ships, life became a ritual of survival. Candles flickered on damp wooden walls, frost grew on every surface, and the air stank of smoke and despair. Officers tried to maintain discipline, cleaning routines, rations, daily prayers. but hope was slipping through their fingers like melting snow. The temperature dropped below 40 degrees, and even breath turned to crystal. Some men began to hallucinate. They saw faces in the ice, heard whispers in the dark when the aurora borealis danced above. It was so beautiful that it hurt to look at, a cruel reminder that the world outside was alive, while they were not. Franklin's officers recorded everything with military precision. Rations consumed, crew members sick, and the death of one man after another. Sailor John Torrington was the first to die. He was buried on Beachy Island, his body carefully preserved in the frozen ground. Over a century later, when archaeologists found him, his face was still intact, eyes half open, skin pale and waxy, as if death itself had been paused. By the second winter, the food began to rot inside its tins. The lead in the cans poisoned them slowly, driving some into madness. Men began to fight, their teeth blackening, their minds breaking. They prayed for the ice to melt, but it only grew thicker. Then, Franklin himself died. No one knows how. Some say illness, others whisper suicide. His men buried him beneath the ice and marked his grave with a cross of wood. The captain who dreamed of glory now slept forever under the very ice he came to conquer. And still, the Arctic held them tight, 2 ghost ships, 129 souls, and no way home. By the spring of 1848, the ice still hadn't released its grip. The ships had become prisons of wood and sorrow, and the men were wasting away. Captain Franklin was gone, and command fell to Francis Crozier, a man known for his calm under pressure, but even he could see the end coming. Their journals described the decision in cold, simple words: "We abandon the ships." That line marked the beginning of the final march. 105 men, weak, starving, loaded what supplies they could onto sledges and began walking south across one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. They carried little, a few tins of food, some guns, Bibles, and strangely, silver cutlery and tea sets, as if refusing to admit civilization had already died around them. The ice was not flat. It was jagged, broken, like a frozen battlefield. Every step was torture. Frostbite took fingers and toes. Snow blinded their eyes, and still they walked. Crozier's plan was desperate but logical. Reach the Great Fish River, then somehow find rescue among the local Inuit or a trading post further south. But logic means nothing when the temperature kills faster than bullets. Days turned into weeks. Men fell behind and never rose again. Those who survived long enough to drag the sledges grew skeletal, their uniforms hanging off their bones. At one point, someone carved a message on paper and left it inside a stone cairn. It would be discovered years later. The note confirmed Franklin's death and the men's attempt to march for safety. It ended with a line that still chills historians: "And we are leaving the ships in despair." After that, the trail went cold. Literally, bodies were found years later, scattered across the tundra, some clutching spoons, others huddled together as if asleep. One had even tried to make tea, the kettle still beside his frozen hand. What happened next was whispered among Inuit hunters for generations. They spoke of pale men wandering the ice, starving, speaking strange words, some resorting to the unthinkable to survive. Whether those tales are truth or legend, no one can say for certain. But one thing is clear: the Arctic took them all. No man from the Franklin expedition ever returned home. In the end, the Franklin expedition wasn't just a story about men lost in the Arctic. It was a story about humanity, our hunger to explore, to conquer, to understand, and the cost of forgetting humility. Think about it. They sailed with the best ships, the best officers, and the latest technology of their time. They believed the Arctic could be charted, measured, controlled, but the ice doesn't obey maps. It moves, it breathes, it remembers. Franklin's men didn't die because they were weak. They died because they underestimated the world they entered. They saw the Arctic as an obstacle, not a teacher. The Inuit, meanwhile, saw it as a living force, something to respect, not to defeat, and that difference made all the difference. Today, the world still makes the same mistake. We build higher, faster, smarter, yet we forget how to listen. We chase control, but nature always has the final word. The melting ice caps, changing climate. They're not punishment, they're reminders. Reminders of what happens when progress loses its soul. But there's another side to this story, a quieter, more hopeful one. Because out of tragedy came understanding. When scientists and Inuit elders worked together to find the ships, they did something Franklin himself never could. They united two worlds, logic and legend, data and intuition, that science and memory, and in that union lies the real discovery. The Arctic didn't just preserve two ships, it preserved a lesson. That survival isn't about domination, it's about harmony. That knowledge means nothing without respect, and that sometimes the answers we seek aren't written in books or found in machines. They're whispered by the wind, echoed through time, waiting for those humble enough to listen. So next time you see a photo of endless white ice, don't just think of death and failure. Think of courage. Think of the men who dared to go where no one had gone, and the people who already knew how to live there. Think of how silence can speak louder than discovery, because maybe the Arctic didn't take Franklin's men. Maybe it simply kept them as part of its story. And hey, if stories like this make you wonder, if they remind you that the world still holds mysteries worth chasing, then stick around, because this is just the beginning. I'm here to bring forgotten history back to life, one story at a time. This is DocuSleep, where history doesn't just speak,